I gave up my job, my independence, and every rupee of my savings because my son promised me it would only be temporary. He said, "Ma, just take care of the children while we settle in America, and we will send you everything you need." I believed him. I sold my wedding bangles to buy school shoes. I skipped meals so my grandchildren would never go hungry. And then came the phone call that changed everything. My grandson lying in a hospital bed, needing emergency surgery, and his own father asking me if I could not manage somehow. That single sentence broke something inside me that had been holding on for over a year. What I did next was something I never imagined myself capable of, and it would either destroy my family forever or finally force them to become the family they had promised to be. This is my story. My name is Vaidehi Sanyal. And until the day my son called me, with his voice trembling with excitement, I believed I understood exactly what my life would look like until the end. I was 65 years old, a widow for almost 11 years, and I had built something I was quietly proud of, a life that depended on no one. I worked as a clerk in a small textile office in Lucknow, the same office where I had spent nearly 2 decades of my life. Every morning I woke before sunrise, made my tea, ironed my own sarees, and walked to the bus stop with my head held high. I was not rich, I was not powerful, but I was free, and freedom, for a woman my age in India, is not something everyone gets to keep. My husband Arun passed away when our son, Rohan, was only 23 years old. Those years after his death were the hardest of my life. I remember nights when I sat alone in our small house, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering how I would manage the bills, the loans, the loneliness. But somehow I did. I raised Rohan by myself, put him through engineering college, and watched him grow into a responsible young man who eventually married a wonderful woman named Priya. They gave me 2 grandchildren, Arav and little Mira, and for a few years, our small family felt complete. We were not wealthy, but we were happy. I used to visit them every weekend, cook their favorite dishes, and watch the children grow a little more each time I saw them. Then, one evening, Rohan called me, and I could hear something different in his voice. It was not his usual tired tone after a long day at work. It was excitement, nervousness, and hope all mixed together. "Ma," he said, "I got the opportunity. The company is transferring me to the United States. Priya and we want to go. This could change everything for us." I remember sitting down slowly on my old wooden chair, my heart racing with a strange mixture of pride and fear. My son, going to America. The land people back home spoke about as though it were paradise itself. I congratulated him with tears in my eyes, genuinely happy for the future he was about to build. But then came the part of the conversation that would change my life forever. "Ma, there is one thing," he said carefully. "The children. We cannot take them right away. Not until we are settled, until we have a stable place, a proper school, everything organized. Could you take care of Arav and Mira for some time? Just until we are ready?" I did not hesitate. What grandmother would? I told him yes, of course. Without a single doubt in my heart, he explained that once they were financially stable, they would send money every month to help me take care of the children's needs, and that as soon as they found a proper home and school system, they would bring the children to live with them in America. It sounded reasonable. It sounded temporary. It sounded like something any loving family would do for each other. What I did not expect was what came next. Rohan gently suggested that since taking care of 2 children full-time would be demanding, especially the young Mira, who was barely 4 years old at the time, it might be difficult for me to continue working at my office job. He said the money they would send would be enough to cover everything, and that my full attention should be on the children, not divided between work and home. I want to be honest with you, watching this back now, thinking about that conversation, something in me hesitated for just a moment. 20 years I had spent building that job, that independence, that sense of purpose outside of being someone's mother or grandmother. But when I looked at Arav's photograph on my phone, his gap-toothed smile, and thought of little Mira calling me Nani Nani every time she saw me, my hesitation disappeared. Family comes first, I told myself. This is temporary. This is what a mother does. So I submitted my resignation letter. My manager, A kind man named Mr. Chaturvedi looked at me with concern and asked if I was certain about this decision. I told him yes, with more confidence than I actually felt inside. My colleagues threw me a small farewell gathering, and as they clapped and wished me well, a strange knot formed in my stomach that I chose to ignore. Rohan and Priya left for the United States 3 weeks later. I still remember standing at the airport, watching them walk through the security gates, waving until I could no longer see them. Arav held my hand tightly that day, confused about why his parents were leaving without him, and Mira cried for almost an hour afterward, calling for her mother. I held both of them close to my chest that night, whispering that everything would be fine, that their parents loved them very much, and that soon we would all be reunited in America as one family. The first few months were honestly beautiful in their own way. Rohan called every single day. He would tell me about his new job, the tall buildings, the wide roads, the strange but exciting American customs. Priya would speak to the children through video calls, her eyes filling with tears every time she saw how much they had grown, even in just a few weeks. The money arrived exactly as promised, transferred directly into my account on the first of every month, enough to cover the children's school fees, food, clothes, and even a little extra for small treats. I moved with the children into a smaller, more affordable apartment, since our old family house felt too large and too expensive to maintain alone with 2 little ones. I decorated their room with colorful curtains, hung Arav's crayon drawings on the walls, and made sure Mira had her favorite stuffed rabbit beside her every night before sleeping. I enrolled Arav in a good school nearby, walked him there every morning myself, and spent my afternoons preparing snacks and helping him with homework while Mira played beside us with her toys. People in our neighborhood would often comment on how devoted I was, how fortunate the children were to have a grandmother like me. Some even said I looked younger, more energetic than before, as though caring for the children had given me a new purpose in life. And in many ways, they were right. Despite the exhaustion of running after 2 young children at my age, despite the aching knees and the sleepless nights when Mira had nightmares, I felt needed. I felt loved. I told myself every single day that this sacrifice was worth it, that soon Rohan and Priya would call and say the words I was waiting to hear. "Ma, everything is ready. Send the children to us." I did not know, sitting there in those early months, filled with hope and quiet pride, that the voice on the other end of the phone would slowly begin to change. I did not know that the monthly transfers, so reliable at first, would soon start arriving late, then later, then not at all some months. I did not know that the excuses would multiply, each one sounding a little more distant than the last. All I knew, in that innocent beginning, was that I loved my grandchildren with everything I had, and that I trusted my son completely. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if there were signs I missed, small hesitations in Rohan's voice that I chose not to notice because I did not want to believe them. But at the time, all I could see was the future we were building together, a family reunited on a new continent, safe and prosperous. I had no idea that the promise made before they boarded that plane would soon become the heaviest weight I had ever carried in my life, heavier than raising a child alone after my husband's death, heavier than any hardship I had faced before. But that, dear friends, is a story for what came next. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening, nearly 7 months after Rohan and Priya had left for America. I remember the date because it was the day before Mira's 5th birthday, and I had already bought the ingredients to make her favorite chocolate cake, the one with the little sugar flowers on top that she always begged me to let her help decorate. I was expecting the monthly transfer as usual, around the first week, but by the 15th, nothing had arrived. This had never happened before. In 7 months, Rohan had never once been late, not even by a day. I told myself it was probably a small delay, a banking issue perhaps, nothing to worry about. I called him that evening, keeping my voice light and casual, not wanting to sound as though I doubted him. "Beta, I just wanted to check. The transfer this month. Is everything all right?" There was a pause on the line, longer than I expected. "Ma, I am so sorry. Things have been difficult here. The cost of living. It is much higher than we thought. Rent alone takes almost half of what I earn. I promise I will send something by the end of the week." I told him not to worry, that the children and I were fine, and we ended the call as we always did, with him telling the children he loved them and promising to see them soon. But that night, after putting Arav and Mira to bed, I sat alone in my small kitchen and did something I had not done in months. I opened my old notebook, the one where I used to track household expenses when I still worked, and I began writing numbers: school fees, rent, food, Mira's birthday gift I had already promised her. The numbers did not add up favorably, not without that transfer. The money arrived 11 days later, less than half of what it usually was. Rohan apologized profusely over the phone, explaining that Priya's hours at work had been reduced, that they had unexpected medical expenses, that the exchange rate was not working in our favor. I listened to every explanation and told him I understood, because what else could I say? He was my son, and I trusted him completely. But this became a pattern, one that repeated itself month after month with a consistency that eventually became impossible to ignore. The transfers grew smaller, the delays grew longer. The excuses grew more elaborate and somehow less convincing each time. There was the month he said his car had broken down and needed expensive repairs. There was the month he said Priya had lost her job temporarily. There was the month, the one that hurt me most deeply, when he simply did not call at all, and I had to reach out 3 times before he finally answered, sounding tired and irritated, as though my concern for my grandchildren's welfare was somehow a burden to him. I began to notice changes in myself during this period, changes I am not entirely proud of. I stopped buying myself new clothes, wearing the same 3 sarees in rotation, saving whatever I could. I stopped taking rickshaws and began walking longer distances, even in the summer heat, to save on transportation costs. I sold the small gold bangles my husband had given me on our wedding day, the ones I had promised myself I would never part with, because Arav needed new school shoes, and I could not bear to send him to school with his toes pressing against worn leather. The hardest part was not the financial struggle itself. I had survived financial struggle before, after Aaron passed away. The hardest part was maintaining the illusion, for the children's sake, that everything was completely fine. Arav, being older, at 9 years old now, had begun to notice things. He asked me once why we no longer bought the imported biscuits he liked, why I seemed tired more often, why I sometimes skipped dinner claiming I was not hungry, when in truth I was saving the portion for the children the next day. "Nani, are we poor?" he asked me one evening, his young eyes searching my face for the truth. I remember forcing a smile, pulling him close, and telling him that we were rich in the ways that mattered most, that we had each other, and that his parents were working very hard to build a beautiful life for all of us in America. I told him this, while my own heart was breaking quietly inside my chest, wondering if I was lying to him or simply protecting him, unsure anymore where one ended and the other began. Mira, being younger, did not ask such questions, but she noticed my exhaustion in her own way, climbing into my lap more often, wrapping her small arms around my neck, as though sensing that her grandmother needed comfort just as much as she did. Those small moments, I confess, were what kept me going during the darkest weeks. Her tiny hand patting my cheek, her whispered, "I love you, Nani." These were the things that reminded me why I had made this sacrifice in the first place. I confided in almost no one during this time. Pride, perhaps foolish pride, kept me from telling my neighbors or my old colleagues the truth of what was happening. When people asked how Rohan and his family were doing in America, I would smile and say they were doing wonderfully, building a beautiful new life. I could not bear the thought of them knowing that my son, the boy I had raised with such devotion, was allowing his own mother to struggle while he built a life thousands of miles away. There was one person, however, who eventually learned the truth. My younger sister Meenakshi, who lived 2 hours away by train. She visited unannounced one weekend, and the moment she stepped into my apartment, I think she understood everything without me saying a word. She looked at how thin I had become, at the sparse pantry, at the worn state of the children's clothes, despite how neatly they were maintained. "Vaidehi," she said quietly, sitting beside me after the children had gone to sleep. "This is not what a mother does for a son. This is what a son takes from a mother." I remember defending Rohan fiercely that night, telling her she did not understand the pressures of building a new life in a foreign country, that things would improve once he was more established. But even as I spoke these words, I could hear how hollow they sounded, even to my own ears. Meenakshi left the following morning, but before she did, she pressed some money into my hand. Money I initially refused, but eventually accepted with tears streaming down my face. Ashamed of the position I had found myself in at 66 years old, she made me promise to call her if things became truly desperate, and I promised, though I had no intention of ever making that call. My pride, that same stubborn pride that had once made me proud of my independence, was now the very thing preventing me from admitting how badly I needed help. The calls from Rohan became less frequent as the months continued. Sometimes 2 weeks would pass without a word. When I did manage to reach him, his voice sounded different, distant, sometimes irritated by what he seemed to perceive as constant demands from my end, though I rarely asked for anything beyond what he had originally promised. Priya, who used to speak to the children almost daily in the beginning, now called perhaps once every 10 days, and even then, the conversations felt rushed, as though she were eager to end the call and return to whatever life she was building in America, a life that seemed to grow further and further away from the one she had left behind in India. I began to wonder, during the quiet hours after the children fell asleep, staring at the ceiling much like I had done in the years after Aaron's death, whether the family I had sacrificed everything for even remembered the promises they had made before boarding that plane. I wondered if Rohan thought about the resignation letter I had submitted, the pension I had walked away from, the independence I had surrendered so willingly because I trusted him completely. I did not yet know that the real test of my strength, the moment that would force me to finally confront everything I had been avoiding, was still ahead of me. I did not know that a single phone call, one I would receive on an ordinary afternoon, would shatter whatever remained of my carefully maintained composure and force me to make a decision that would change everything between my son and me forever. The call that changed everything came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in October, nearly 1 year and 4 months after Rohan and Priya had left for America. I remember the weather that day, unusually humid for the season, the kind of heaviness in the air that seems to warn you something is coming before you even understand what it is. Arav had come home from school looking pale and complaining of a stomachache. I did not think much of it at first. Children get stomach aches often, and I made him some ginger tea and had him lie down. But by evening, his condition had worsened dramatically. He was burning with fever, vomiting repeatedly, and complaining of sharp pain on his lower right side. My hands trembled as I touched his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his small body, and something in my chest tightened with a fear I had not felt in years. I rushed him to the nearest hospital, carrying Mira in one arm and half dragging, half carrying Arav with the other, flagging down a rickshaw with a desperation that startled even the driver. At the hospital, after what felt like an eternity of waiting rooms and worried faces, the doctor delivered news that made my knees weak. Arav needed emergency surgery for appendicitis. It could not wait. If left untreated, the doctor explained gravely, the appendix could rupture, leading to complications that could threaten his life. I remember standing in that sterile hallway, Mira crying and clinging to my sari, and feeling a wave of panic wash over me that I had never experienced before, not even in the darkest days after my husband's death. The hospital required a deposit before they could proceed with the surgery, an amount that, after months of dwindling and inconsistent transfers from Rohan, I simply did not have. I called Rohan immediately, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form complete sentences. I explained the situation as clearly as I could through my panic, told him his son needed surgery immediately, told him the amount the hospital required, and begged him to send the money as quickly as possible. There was silence on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had disconnected. Then Rohan spoke, and his words are ones I will never forget as long as I live. "Ma, I don't have that kind of money right now. Things have been very tight here. Can you not manage somehow? Ask Meenakshi auntie, maybe? Or perhaps the hospital has a payment plan." I stood there in that hallway, phone pressed against my ear, feeling something inside me break in a way I had never experienced before. My grandson was lying in a hospital bed, in pain, frightened, needing surgery that could save his life, and his own father was asking me if I could not manage somehow, as though I had not already sacrificed my job, my independence, and every ounce of my savings trying to manage for over a year. I do not remember exactly what I said in response. My mind was too consumed with panic for Arav's well-being to fully process my own emotions in that moment. I ended the call, and with trembling hands, I called Meenakshi, my sister, without a single moment of hesitation, without asking a single question beyond what was needed, told me she would transfer the money immediately and would take the first available train to be by my side. The surgery, thankfully, was successful. I sat outside the operating room for 3 hours, praying with a desperation I had not felt since Aaron's final days in the hospital years earlier, promising every deity I could think of that if Arav survived this, I would find whatever strength I needed to protect these children properly, no matter what it required of me. When the surgeon finally emerged and told me the operation had gone well, that Arav would recover fully, I broke down completely in that hospital corridor. Years of accumulated exhaustion, fear, and suppressed anger finally finding release in tears, I could no longer hold back. Meenakshi arrived just an hour later, and when she saw me, she did not say a word. She simply wrapped her arms around me and let me cry against her shoulder as though I were a child myself. Arav remained in the hospital for 4 days for observation and recovery. During those 4 days, sitting beside his bed, watching his small chest rise and fall with each breath, watching Mira curl up beside him despite the nurse's gentle protests, something within me shifted permanently. I thought about the year and 4 months that had passed since Rohan and Priya had boarded that plane with such hope and excitement. I thought about the promises made, the resignation letter I had submitted so willingly, the gold bangles I had sold, the meals I had skipped, the sleepless nights spent worrying about money while trying to shield 2 innocent children from the truth of our circumstances. I thought about Rohan's voice on the phone, asking if I could not manage somehow, as though the entire weight of raising his children while he built his life thousands of miles away was simply an inconvenience I was expected to absorb without complaint. Rohan called again 2 days after the surgery, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern, asking about Arav's recovery, asking if there was anything he could do. I remember sitting on the small plastic chair beside my grandson's hospital bed, looking at his sleeping face, and finding a strength within myself that I had nearly forgotten I possessed. "Rohan," I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be, "we need to talk, not about small things, not about excuses. We need to talk about what happens now, truly now, not someday, not when things settle down. Now." He tried, at first, to deflect, to offer more explanations about the cost of living, about Priya's job situation, about how difficult everything had been for them in America. I let him speak, let him exhaust every excuse he had prepared, and when he finally fell silent, I spoke words I had been suppressing for over a year. "Rohan, I gave up my job for you. I gave up my independence, the life I built for myself after your father passed away, because you promised me it would be temporary, because you promised me support while I raised your children. Instead, I have watched that support disappear month by month, while you and Priya built a life for yourselves that seems to have no room left for the children you left behind." I told him about selling my gold bangles. I told him about the meals I had skipped so the children would not go hungry. I told him about walking miles in the summer heat to save on rickshaw fares. I told him about nearly losing his son because I could not afford a hospital deposit, and about the desperate call to my sister that saved Arav's life while his own father hesitated to help. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more uncomfortable. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, and I imagined him sitting somewhere in America, perhaps in a comfortable apartment, perhaps surrounded by conveniences I could only imagine, confronting for the first time the full weight of what his family had endured in his absence. "Ma," he finally said, his voice cracking slightly. "I did not realize. I thought you were managing fine. I thought the money we sent, even when it was less, was enough. I did not know things had gotten this bad. I wanted to believe him. Some part of me, the part that had raised him, that had rocked him to sleep as an infant, that had celebrated every milestone of his childhood, desperately wanted to believe that his ignorance was genuine rather than convenient. but another part of me, the part that had grown stronger through this ordeal, refused to simply accept another explanation without demanding real change. "I am not asking for excuses anymore, Rohan," I told him. "I am asking for a decision. Either you and Priya find a way to properly support these children, consistently and honestly, or you need to come and take them yourselves. Because I cannot continue sacrificing everything I have while watching you build a life that seems to have forgotten why you needed my help in the first place." I did not know, as I spoke those words in that hospital corridor with Arav sleeping peacefully behind me, finally out of danger, whether they would lead to genuine change or simply more empty promises. I did not know if my son would rise to meet the responsibility I was demanding of him, or if this conversation would become simply another chapter in a story of broken commitments. What I did know, with a certainty that surprised even myself, was that I was no longer willing to suffer in silence. Whatever happened next, whatever Rohan decided, I would no longer sacrifice my dignity, my health, and my children's well-being to protect the comfort of adults who had made promises they seemed unwilling to keep. The conversation that followed in the weeks after Arav's recovery would determine not just the financial future of our family, but whether the relationship between myself and my son could ever truly be repaired. The weeks following that hospital corridor conversation were unlike any I had experienced in the entire ordeal. For the first time in over a year, Rohan called consistently, not with excuses, but with genuine questions about the children's daily needs, about school expenses, about what Arav and Mira actually required to live comfortably rather than simply survive. I remained cautious, my trust badly bruised from so many broken promises, but I allowed myself a small, careful hope that something had truly shifted. 2 weeks after Arav was discharged from the hospital, Priya called me directly for the first time in months. Her voice sounded different from what I remembered, quieter, more hesitant, carrying a weight I had not heard from her before. "Ma," she said, using the term she had always used for me, though it had felt increasingly distant over the past year. "Rohan told me everything, about the surgery, about what you have been going through." I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know the full extent of it. I listened without interrupting, letting her speak, letting her explain her side of a story I had only heard through Rohan's increasingly unreliable accounts. She told me about her own struggles adjusting to life in America, the isolation she had felt, the pressure of a demanding job, the guilt that had grown so heavy she had found it easier to avoid confronting it than to face it directly. She told me she had assumed, perhaps too easily, that whatever money they sent was sufficient, that Rohan had managed the household finances, and she had simply trusted his judgment without asking enough questions herself. I could have responded with anger, and in truth, part of me wanted to. But 66 years of life had taught me that anger, however justified, rarely repairs what has been broken. Instead, I told her, calmly but firmly, exactly what the past year and 4 months had cost me, not just financially, but physically and emotionally. I told her about the nights I had cried alone after the children fell asleep, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake trusting my own son. I told her about the fear that had gripped me in that hospital hallway, wondering if my grandson would survive because his parents could not, or would not, provide the money needed for his surgery. Priya cried on the phone that day, and I believe even now, looking back, that her tears were genuine. She promised things would change, that she would take a more active role in ensuring the children's needs were met consistently, that she would no longer simply assume everything was fine without checking directly with me. What followed over the next several months was a slow, sometimes difficult process of rebuilding trust. The monthly transfers became consistent again, and more importantly, they became sufficient, calculated properly to cover the actual cost of raising 2 growing children rather than whatever amount happened to be convenient after their own expenses were covered. Rohan began calling the children every single day again, not just brief check-ins, but real conversations where he asked about their school days, their friends, their small joys and worries. But the most significant change came 4 months after that difficult hospital conversation, when Rohan called me with news I had genuinely stopped believing I would ever hear. "Ma," he said, and I could hear something different in his voice, a seriousness mixed with what sounded like determination. Priya and I have been talking, really talking, about everything. We have found a proper school for the children here, a good neighborhood, an apartment large enough for all of us. We want to bring you and the children to America. Not just the children, Ma. You too. We want you to come live with us, not as a temporary arrangement, but as part of our family, permanently. I remember sitting in silence for a long moment after he said this, unable to fully process what I was hearing. For over a year, I had imagined countless scenarios for how this situation might resolve itself. I had imagined the children eventually leaving to join their parents while I remained alone in India, my purpose fulfilled, but my heart aching from the separation. I had imagined continuing this exhausting struggle indefinitely, watching the children grow up with a grandmother who sacrificed everything while their parents remained distant figures on a phone screen. I had even imagined, in my darkest moments, simply refusing to continue this arrangement at all, taking the children back to live with Meenakshi, away from a family that seemed unable to fulfill its promises. But I had never truly allowed myself to imagine this outcome, a genuine reunion, a family made whole again, not through obligation or convenience, but through real recognition of everything that had been sacrificed and everything that needed to be repaired. Rohan, I said carefully, my voice trembling slightly, are you certain about this? This is not a small decision. I am 66 years old, starting a new life in a foreign country at my age. Ma, he interrupted gently, you gave up everything for us, for your grandchildren, without a single complaint for over a year. The least we can do now is make sure you never have to sacrifice like that again. Priya and I discussed this thoroughly. We want you here, not as someone who takes care of the children while we live our lives separately, but as part of our home, our family together. The process of actually moving to America took several more months, filled with visa applications, paperwork, and the complicated logistics of relocating an entire household across the world. During this time, Rohan and Priya remained consistent in a way they had not been throughout the previous year, sending money reliably, calling regularly, and involving me in decisions about our future living arrangements rather than simply informing me of decisions already made. I remember the day I finally boarded that plane, Arav now 10 years old and Mira turning 6, both children buzzing with excitement about seeing their parents again after what had felt like an eternity to them, though in truth, it had been just over 1 year and 8 months since they had last seen Rohan and Priya in person. I looked out the small airplane window as we ascended above the clouds, leaving behind the country where I had spent my entire life, the country where I had raised my son, buried my husband, and nearly broken myself trying to keep a promise that had almost cost me everything. When we landed in America and walked through the arrival gates, I saw Rohan and Priya waiting, both of them crying openly as Arav and Mira ran into their arms. I stood back for a moment, watching this reunion, feeling emotions so complicated I could not fully separate them from one another. Relief, exhaustion, cautious hope, and beneath it all, a lingering wariness that I knew would take considerable time to fully heal. Rohan approached me slowly after embracing his children, and for a moment we simply looked at each other, two people who had been through something that had fundamentally changed the nature of our relationship. Then he embraced me, holding me tightly, and whispered words I had genuinely not expected to hear. Ma, I am so sorry. I am sorry it took a crisis. Sorry it took Arav's surgery. Sorry it took you finally standing up for yourself. For me to understand what I was allowing to happen. I promise you, from this day forward, you will never have to sacrifice like that again. Living in America these past several months has not been without its challenges. Adjusting to a new culture, a new climate, a new way of life at 66 years old has required patience and flexibility I did not always know I possessed. But what has mattered most is that I no longer carry the burden alone. Rohan and Priya have both taken active roles in raising Arav and Mira, no longer treating my presence as a convenient solution to a temporary problem, but as an integral, valued part of our family unit. I still think often about that year and 4 months when I felt so completely alone, when I sold my gold bangles to buy school shoes, when I skipped meals to ensure the children had enough to eat, when I nearly lost my grandson because his parents could not or would not prioritize his needs above their own comfort. I do not think those memories will ever fully fade, nor do I believe they should. They remind me, and I hope they remind Rohan and Priya as well, of exactly what can happen when promises are made carelessly, and support is treated as optional rather than essential. But I also choose now to focus on what has been rebuilt rather than solely on what was broken. Family, I have learned through this painful experience, is not defined by the promises made in moments of hope and excitement, but by the actions taken during moments of genuine difficulty. Rohan and Priya failed that test initially, failed it badly enough that it nearly cost their son his life, but they were given the chance to learn, to grow, and to become the parents and the family members they should have been from the beginning. And for that, I remain grateful. Today, watching Arav do his homework at our kitchen table while Mira plays nearby, watching Rohan come home from work each evening to genuinely spend time with his children rather than simply providing for them financially, I finally feel something I had nearly given up hope of ever feeling again: peace. Not the peace of a promise fulfilled without struggle, but the harder-earned, more meaningful peace that comes from a family that broke nearly beyond repair and chose ultimately to heal.